Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Masel, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started. Congratulations, you're going to college. Now that's the praise a lot of young adults have heard in the coming months as we're coming into the new year. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. So, going to college is a huge milestone in every young adult's life. It was such a big thing for me, especially being the first in my family to go. But with college comes a whole new ballgame in taking care of yourself, having your own autonomy, and making all these decisions for yourself by yourself. For parents, this is usually where your parenting is really put to the test in guiding without forceful impacts. But college isn't all fun and games. It is still academia, and there's still so much you should be ready for before starting this whole new phase. And now that's exactly what we're going to be looking into today. And to help me with this preparation is someone who has also asked how colleges can help in making sure students know what they're in for. He holds a Ph.D. in cognitive psychology and is currently a professor in education psychology at Georgia State University. Dr. Joe Magliano, thanks for joining me, Joe.
Oh, it's great to join you, and it's a real pleasure to be a part of this podcast. So I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Now, I'm very fascinated in psychology, but I have not quite heard of cognitive psychology. So do you mind explain to me what cognitive psychology is for those of us who don't know?
Um, you know, uh, Psychology as a field is broken into different areas of specialty. You'll have developmental psychology, which I know is the focus of this podcast. You have social psychology. Um, uh, you have clinical psychology, and the list goes on. And we think of these different areas as having hard boundaries between them, and they do. But they also, they're blended. So cognitive psychology is that area of psychology that focuses on the mental processes that support our ability to, uh, problem solve, comprehend, make decisions. Um, it's the area of psychology that focuses on how memory works. And of course, other areas of psychology address these issues. But what makes cognitive psychology different about than these other areas is we're typically focusing on the adults, and we're really focusing on the trying to understand how these mental processes operate and their outcome, both cognitively and for some folks, they would want to understand how these processes are grounded in brain activity. My area of research is in I would describe my sub area of cognitive psychology is discourse psychology. So that's an area of psychology that studies how we understand connected language, or use connected language. So I, my area of my focus when I was getting my PhD and in some aspects of my career was on the mental mechanics that enable us to comprehend what we read. As you're processing through a text? What are the processes that support our ability to form a memory for the text, to generate inferences that help us understand the text? I over time became interested in how those processes operate in other media, such as film and comics. But I also became interested in, over time, what makes students ready to read in college. And, you know, it's taking what I was studying in a more isolated kind of situation and thinking about that phenomenon in a larger context, namely students' ability to find success over time in an educational context.
That sounds really fascinating. I think especially when it comes to university students, they go from reading high school books, which are pretty much, if you think about the high school process, a lot of it is pretty much dumbed down for a lot of students in dot points or in a format that is very much focused on just getting the kids out into college. However, when they get to college, especially for me, when I remember that first semester at college, there was that whole other fear of the fact that there are 30 pages that I'm meant to read in 2 days.
Yeah.
Where in high school, there were dot points that I had to read over a semester or over a term. And 30 pages in 2 days, I could barely sit still to read 2 pages in a day. So there's that whole process. Like I love the fact that there's so much research there's research in that, because that was something that I think a lot of students, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of students leave their assignments to the last minute, is because the amount of attention span that a lot of us have, especially going into understanding the whole process of college, is completely different from what high school used to be like, or what primary school used to be like. And suddenly we're a little fish in a huge pond who have no way of figuring out how to get out of it, or how to find a place that fits in with them.
You know, there's a lot we could unpack in what you just shared in terms of my interest as a researcher, but also in my experience as a professor. You know, there's a difference between textbooks and primary documents. And in high school and in college, students are asked to read textbooks that have been carefully written, and the good ones are scaffolded in a way that an individual that comes into a reading that doesn't have a lot of knowledge in the domain can gain that knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, even reading a textbook can be challenging because you're low knowledge, but they've been written in a way that are intended that take that into consideration. But college students may be asked to read text beyond what they encounter in a textbook that have been written for, they may have been written for the practitioners of the discipline. So they assume a ton of common ground. Concepts are not necessarily going to be explained if they're deemed unnecessary to be explained. I like to think that one of the things anybody can become a struggling reader. You just give them a text for which they don't have a lot of background knowledge, and they're going to find that they struggle. They're going to experience that I'm reading and I don't understand why, what I'm reading. If I pick up a physics text, even one that's been written for the general public, it's a real struggle for me. And so I think one of the things that college students can face is that experience, that experience. I mean, just think of the difference between reading a novel and reading a textbook. You know, when you're reading a novel, you have, as you're processing the words, it's leading to the activation of a lot of knowledge that you use to make sense of your everyday experiences. And you don't have that experience when you're reading a textbook. And, you know, people don't like doing what they don't feel like they're good at doing. And this, you know, I often think, why do students procrastinate? You know, it's not, you know, because students are lazy. You know, it has everything to do with the fact that maybe they're, my hypothesis is students may procrastinate or not engage in activities because they don't feel like they know how to do it, or they don't feel adept in that activity. And so I think this, I mean, you're closer to being a student than me, so I trust your insights. That notion of putting things off because it's uncomfortable or challenging, I think is probably one explanation for why students may put things off.
Yes. No, I definitely agree. I think especially when it comes to journal articles and, like you said, articles that they're given to us to read that are pretty much written for people in that field or people who have studied that, um, there's a whole sense of intimidation that sort of comes along with it, of the fear
Right.
that, okay, I don't understand it straight away, but I can't feel like I can ask because I think I'm supposed to know this. And I think
How about
that's
that? Yeah.
definitely what I felt the first year of, okay, I don't think I can ask questions because am I supposed to already know this? How come so many people are getting it and I'm not getting it? So
Yeah.
there is that. I think I Googled every word that sort of was really difficult and somehow tried to put it together as to what it meant. And there's that huge intimidation that sort of comes on when some people can understand it and some people can't.
You know, I think back to, look, I had that experience in grad school. I mean, you know, here I'm supposed to become a disciplinary specific expert, and I've got to figure out, or I've got to deal with situations where I'm reading a text and I don't, I don't get it. And what does it mean about me? And how do I manage or deal with that situation? You know, I mean, I know that later on, some of what we'll, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about recommendations, and some of the recommendations I have will be informed by the literature, and some of them will be informed by my own experience. But part of what, uh, 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 part of what I think students at all levels need to develop is a tolerance for not understanding. And I mean, everybody that becomes a disciplinary expert starts off with being exposed to content that is being disseminated in a format where they're like, I don't know. I don't quite understand this. It's part of the process. You know, it's the challenge of the challenge of education at all levels, but certainly in college, is you have individuals that come into a class and they're low knowledge, and knowledge is having knowledge related to a text is a critical for supporting these basic cognitive processes that support comprehension. And their knowledge depleted, and you have to create a context where they're able to develop that knowledge and engage with the various media that you are asking them to process, to convey the knowledge you're trying to convey. And I think the biggest, the probably one of the most important things that I learned I don't remember if I learned it as a undergraduate, but I certainly learned it as a graduate student, that it was okay to struggle, and that it was okay to find, a smaller set, to not maybe fully understand what a document is saying, but being able to identify information in there, in that document, that is useful to how I need to use it in the context of why I'm reading it. And when you think about reading in that way, it becomes considerably more tractable. I think when students come in and they think about reading as this generic activity, which it is not, that's where we can sort of face this daunting experience. Just as a side, I mean, I'm teaching next semester a seminar, an undergraduate seminar, called the psychology of stories, the cognition of stories, sorry. And there are students that range from being kind of advanced undergraduates, they've read some stuff, they've had exposure, all the way down to very little experience reading primary documents. And it's part of the lesson of that course is to feel okay. If you're reading something, you're like, I don't know what the heck that meant, because we'll come in and talk about it. And this gets to your point. Part of making sense of the complexities of text, it can be and should be a social experience where students can come together as a community and together figure out what something complex means, with the guidance and support of a professor.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's one thing that I really liked about college, especially, is the fact that I got to experience it with people who were older than me, with people who were younger than me. And it's not like high school where you're stuck with the same experiences, stuck with the same people, the same ages, who have very similar life knowledge. But you're dealing with people who are sometimes in their mid-50s, sort of trying to figure things out and trying to understand. And the amount of life experience that they've sort of taken in from a text and brought into a text is incredible. And that's the one thing that I really liked about college more than high school, is the fact that I learned so much just from being around people who are more of an expert in something than I am, or have more knowledge about something than I do, because it was an incredible experience to sort of see how they understood things, and I can add my input in when I felt like I had something that I could add and fill in the gaps with. So yeah, I will say that I did love college a whole lot more than high school.
Yeah. I'm relatively new. I spent most of my career at another institution and came to GSU in 2018. And GSU is recognized in the United States as one of the they're leading the way in terms of college success, and finding ways to support students of a variety of backgrounds. They've developed the model that other universities have adopted, one of the models. And but in this context, I love teaching here because there's such a diversity of. I mean, it's an urban embedded university. It recruits a lot of first generation students from a variety of backgrounds, and to be able to see that perspective, and to create experiences for students where they're able to celebrate their lens or perspective and learn how to accurately think about the content I'm trying to disseminate. It's a pretty cool experience. So I definitely see your observation from my end as a professor, and it's outside of studying this issue. It's one of the things I've become more and more passionate about. One of the aspects of doing this gig that I've become more and more passionate about when and trying to create situations that afford that. I haven't been able to sort of work in the social experience that you were talking about, but COVID. I came here right before COVID, so it's just being able to really help students learn. I think that one of the most important skills that a student can learn in college is to encounter complex material through your lens, internalize it, and communicate your understanding of it. I think that's a rinse and repeat skill that students, or that people in beyond college will need to be able to do. You're experiencing it right now. You're learning about a topic, and you've got to, on the fly, respond through your lens and convince other people of the importance of that issue. I mean, college and learning to read in college, I firmly believe, can provide that experience. But we want students to be able to understand that. And this gets back to the fear, the fear of not understanding, the fear of you being the only one. You're not. And, I think that's, if we come to really what I think fulfilling careers, we're going to be in that place of not knowing, learning how to master and use that knowledge, and then it happens again. This is a part of life.
No, exactly.
Does that make sense? I'm sharing stuff that's been in my head, but I've never had the opportunity to write about this stuff. It's just things I reflect upon in my role as an instructor.
No, it's making a ton of sense to me. I think dealing with that experience directly and seeing the student's perspective, and also hearing the professor's experience, there's so much overlap in terms of what's observed and how I've sort of understand. I definitely agree that learning text and learning from the college level text, I think, sort of shapes us to how we understand a whole lot of different scenarios. And it's definitely helped like you said, it's helped in this job. It's helped me to sort of pick up things quickly and see which one's going to stick. And especially the idea of skimming and scanning, I think that I did not learn that until university. So that was really a helpful tool as well. And I think it's definitely grown so much in terms of how I understand what I'm reading, how I'm going to what's important and what's not. And I think that's such a great way of remembering. So I don't have to remember everything about a text. I remember the most important parts, but I pick to me what the most important part is to me.
Right.
And I use that and hang on to that for dear life, because I think that's the way that I've learned to do things. And if there's one piece of text that someone else has found interesting, that's also from their perspective, that's what they've stuck to. So college text everyone has a different interpretation of it, which I always find amazing every time I go into class discussions. So yeah, it's definitely helped in my observation as to what I want to bring to the table, especially because I think college is not exactly, you're not learning dot point, at least not in the field that I'm in. I'm learning to build on something from what I've learned. So I'm learning to make a film or make a documentary off of what I've learned in a classroom. So I've stuck with one idea and stuck with that and used that in my career, and that's what's helped. Now, that's such a great introduction into our topic, and I love to get to know what you think. Everyone has a very different definition as to what parenting is to them. What would your definition of parenting be?
Well, again, this is not informed by people who study parenting. I love to say I don't. It's informed by my general approach to thinking about complex concepts as a psychologist, a research psychologist, and also informed by my experience as a parent. I actually try not to define concepts. I think of them in terms of what are the features. So, what are the, an important feature of parenting is a relationship between a caregiver and a child. For example, a teacher and a child, that's not parenting. So part of being a parent is that you're a caregiver. Obviously, there doesn't need to be a biological relationship, but it involves the activities that an individual is engaging in to support the social, emotional, and cognitive development of the individuals that they're caregiving. Now, that probably sounds like it comes out of a textbook, but being a parent, that's what we're doing. And the thing about parenting is, it's not. It can be an explicit activity where somebody is deliberately engaging in those activities, but it is also an implicit activity where I'm doing things with my kids that are where they're it's an activity that is fostering these different aspects. I mean, you go to the park with your kid, and you're hanging out with them. That's an activity that can be construed as parenting because it's part of that supportive social, emotional, and cognitive development. Well, that's my kind of informed by the maybe the field, but not really answer to your question.
No, that's perfect. I love the comparison with studying the academic part, but also the real life lived experience as well. Sort of your own personal view as to what parenting is to you and how you've gone ahead and been a parent, not just a academic, but also dealing with the parenting side of it. And I love how you shared your advice on both of it. So, no, that's perfect. So, when it comes to that overview into the transition of being a college student and sort of going through the college experiences, what are some key milestones and challenges that a lot of college students face when sort of going into dealing with college and dealing with the situation of being in college?
I think you hinted about this in our earlier when you were talking about some of your experiences as a college student. So it goes to social, emotional, and cognitive, right? We can break it down that way. But certainly social. You're in you are in a students are transitioning into, especially when they're living on campus, to a what can be a chaotic transition to a completely unstructured social environment where they have to create absolutely new social networks from scratch. In grade school through high school, you're with these same people for a protracted period of time. Now that's about ready to start, or through 4 years of college, but you're that starting from scratch is certainly presents challenges, and more the level of challenge depends on the individual. Some kids are very gregarious, extroverted. They can create those social networks easily. Some kids less so. Um, uh, you know, um, Emotional. You're in a situation where you don't have your parents as there for that emotional support on a day-to-day basis. So there's this need to self-regulate and self-manage um, uh, that aspect of one's life. Certainly, high school, the skill sets needed to um, uh, uh, navigate the social and emotional challenges have were being developed, but the metaphor of the training wheels being off is on the mark. In terms of being a student, in general, there's considerable self-regulation skills that are now have to be in place. Self-regulation is important prior to entering college, but again, the training wheels are off. So the student is responsible for staying motivated and engaged, and there's an interaction between those two things, and implementing strategies, a whole host of strategies, from strategies that ensure that you're where you need to be when you need to be, to strategies that involve actually being able to accomplish the specific task that you've been asked to accomplish. But there's also, I think, uh, uh, this an important skill set that is required is a willingness to take advantage of the infrastructure around you. I've known plenty of students, including some I may be close to, that familial wise, that are hesitant, like you, to ask for help or to seek out support because there's this understanding, there's this belief that I got to figure it out on my own. Yeah, you've got to figure out a bunch on your own. But learning how to take advantage of the larger system that you're in the context, whatever's around that context, being able to take advantage of what exists, being able to create support from the ether, are all part of an important skill set that prior to coming to college, there may have been somebody else that was, forcing it on you, but now students aren't forced. They only take advantage of that which they choose to take advantage of. That's not quite true, but because many universities know that students they need to be placed in a situation where they can see these support systems. But for the most part, it's up to the student. So, it's the same social, emotional, cognitive skill sets that are needed. But now it's up to the student to develop the independence in navigating these aspects of their lives. And in a situation where we can think about the world in social, emotional, and cognitive, but that's not how people do. They don't break it up that way. Not when they don't, not at all. It's just this big mess of stuff that's happening. But but those distinctions are meaningful,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think especially going that first year, it was so daunting just trying to figure out do things myself. I still remember because in Australia, you don't have to leave home in order to go to college. So I was still living at home at this point, and I still kept calling my mom, like, Mom, should I buy lunch or should I come home for lunch? Like, there is still that. I was still not used to the fact that I had to figure things out for myself, or I had to make
Mm,
decisions for myself, because there was still me questioning, okay, I still rely on my parents for advice. I still come to them. I still sort of have
mm,
that need to know what they think, because I was so used to being home for lunch, or straight after high school going home for lunch and having lunch. And it was
right,
that whole different transition into, okay, I need to figure out things for myself. I need to grow up. I need to figure out how to get a job. I need to figure out how to do all these things. And it wasn't until I think my second year that I started actually going to student services
right,
and
yeah,
looking into places that can help me write a CV or help me go through my resume. And
yeah,
that's when I started taking advantage of a lot of the services that I really didn't know that they had.
yeah,
And it was such a big grown up transition for me, from going from my first year
yes,
and just figuring out the buildings, and the second year figuring out what I'm going to do as a grown up and how I'm going to build on what I didn't know was available.
right. You know, I'm glad you mentioned something there, because there's another aspect of the transition to college I forgot to mention that is absolutely critical, and that's developing career awareness. You know, developing. I mean, it's. I actually tell my students, my undergraduates, I know it looks and feels like school, but I think of this as professional development rather than school. And
Yep.
you're here to get to develop a profession, and there's such variability in some students develop that career awareness um, very early on, and others it takes a while um, for that uh, to develop. So that is when that happens to me, that's one of the most important milestones that a college student can experience, is that understanding that they're doing this to have a profession, and then have a sense of what that profession might be. There are some students that may never experience it, but to me, until they get into the job, that can
Mhm.
happen. Uh, so for those folks out there that didn't experience that, you can still find success, of course. It's just I find that it's an important transition, and the reason why I thought about that was you mentioned about getting a CV and building a resume. That is the kind of activity that begins to reflect career awareness.
Yeah. No, it's such a big part of going to college, I think, as well. I mean, you can have a CV and resume without going to college, of course, and I think that's
Right.
such a big thing to note there. But when talking about college, there's that huge awareness that you're no longer a kid anymore. You're no longer a child
Mm,
just going to school. You're there to build a career. You're not there to learn just to learn. You're there to learn to create something, or you're there
mm,
to um in a lack of a better word, just to change some aspect of your field, or change some aspect of what your interest is, whether it's you're going to change children's minds by going into teaching, or you're going to create a documentary on the way that the world is changing by going into film. Like, there's so many different aspects that you can go in that you didn't really realize you had the opportunity to do until you build your resume, or until you build that CV and figure out where your gaps are in what
mm,
your career is needing, or what your interests are, what your life is out in and outside of college as well.
yeah. Uh, I think of life as one big problem-solving activity. And I don't mean that we're facing problems. I mean, there are things that we need to change, outcomes we want to achieve. And life is about learning how to manipulate your environment so that you can achieve the outcomes that you want to that you want. And to me, college is about discovering the problems that you like to solve. And you can have a fulfilling career if your goal is to have a career that you like. And not everybody's, some people, a career is a means to an end, and that's fine. But if your goal is to have a career you truly like and enjoy, the task at hand is to finding that job where you love solving the problems that you face on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. No, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's probably why I've changed my career I changed it twice when I was younger. I went from teaching and going into the art field, and now I'm in media. And I think media is a problem I love solving, and I love the rush and the feeling of it. So I definitely went away from teaching and away from dealing with kids directly into trying to figure out how to create something that's going to help change a child's mind or help them figure things out. So going into that has really changed my perspective as to what I love to do as a career. And I definitely think that college has helped in changing my interests and changing what I can do with my interests. So I will say that. Now, I want to go ahead and mention, because I know a lot of students are starting college next year, and a lot of parents are trying to find ways to help their child be ready for college. And I wanted to know, how can parents sort of cultivate their children from an early age that sort of allows them to help build on being ready for going into college? And what are some things that they can do, whether they're going to college next year or the year after? What can they do as teenagers to sort of mentally and critically be ready for college?
It's a really complex question to answer.
Yes.
And we'll see how I do. This is, I study what's happening inside the head, not necessarily the social environment. All right. Part of being ready for college, I think, is being prepared for the culture. I don't know about in Australia, but certainly in the United States, high school are a little bit more attentive to creating various activities that can go a long way in helping students be ready for the college experience. So when I was in high school, I graduated from high school in 1983. So you just went to high school. Yeah, you had some people that did stuff or played in sports, but there wasn't this infrastructure of clubs or activities that that get students engaged in something, anything, in a manner that prepares them for the kind of peer-to-peer relationships that they're going to need to support their need to develop in college. So that's not being a passive student is, I think, high school student, or middle school student, getting involved in those activities help. And I don't say that as an expert. I say that as an observer, as a parent. Certainly, in terms of being ready to read in college, the most, yeah, the two reading researchers, Stanovich and Wetz, did a whole bunch of research on what are the primary individual differences or factors of an individual that predict success in being or success as a comprehender. And it's one big predictor is the amount of reading you do. It sounds like a trivial thing, but reading is a practiced activity. And the more you read, the more knowledge the more knowledge you build. So being ready for college, one activity is just reading. It sounds trivial, and not just reading, certainly reading anything, but exposing yourself to a variety of different domains, narrative, expository texts that focus on some topic of interest, is a critical aspect of being ready to read. Certainly providing kids with the opportunity to develop independence in their to become independent in their in the world they live in. And I know this is a real challenge. Boy, this was a challenge during COVID. I have my oldest is just starting their first year in college, and their experience in high school and their ability to live independently was absolutely affected by COVID. But so I understand the current challenges that some parents might have faced in the past 4 years. But being able to create situations where students where kids are able to experience a certain level of independence and responsibility, and there's plenty of ways that you can that can be done. There's not one activity that can foster that. One of the things that I'm also coming to terms with as a parent is my kids aren't me, and they have. I think of us as all having strengths and challenges, and part of being successful is recognizing your challenges, maybe leveraging them in some way, or being able to lessen their impact. And my strengths and challenges are not my kids' strengths and challenges. So their engagement in college is not what my experience was. And, I'm finding myself looking at their experience and thinking, why aren't they doing what I did? Well, it's because they're not you. And this is true leading up to, the years leading up to college. I speak more informally in response to this question. So I think taking advantage of activities that the high school or community provide, certainly being an avid reader outside of school, developing, providing opportunities for kids to have independence in various aspects of their life will certainly help them be ready for what's to come when the training wheels are off.
Yep. No, I can definitely agree with that. I think reading definitely is a big is a big one for me. I was glad that I got into reading in high school and sort of developed that even further, because I think that was such an important part. And I loved, and I kept doing this idea all throughout university, is I kept highlighting and using page markers and post-it notes about things I didn't understand or wanted to relate to,
Yeah.
wanted to ask questions. So there was that whole use of um, everything that I didn't quite understand was a different color highlighter or a different color post-it note. So then
Mm.
I could go ahead and refer back to it later on when I had
Yeah.
questions. So I think reading is definitely one of the biggest recommendations. I would definitely agree with you in terms of that, because I think
Mm.
when I developed those skills in high school, I brought it along to university and it made everything so much easier.
Yeah.
But I went through my second and final year of my undergrad throughout COVID. So that whole dynamic changed how I'm supposed to study, or how everything was
Mm.
online at that point. So everything,
Yeah.
all the textbooks were online. You couldn't really go ahead and highlight off a textbook that well unless you printed out 60 pages worth of
Mhm.
text that you were supposed to read. And it changed my brain. I will say I did not focus throughout those 2 years. I'm surprised that I got through those 2 years, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because it was a difficult time.
There is uh, uh, just a jump on that. It, there is a considerable amount of research on exploring whether or not the uh, medium, paper, digital, of a text affects processing, and there is some research suggest that uh, digital media can be processed more shallowly than print media. Um, I think that's probably going to change as uh, uh, you know there's going to be a time when all the media we encounter is going to be digital and not on paper. So some of it is, I think you explain why that there are certain strategies that you can engage um, in one media that you can't engage in the other media. Um, and if you're in online courses, and we haven't even talked about that, it's becoming more and more prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there, and there's many reasons why that's the case. But if a student's experience is in person, and you
Mm-hmm.
have all the infrastructure to support that, and now you're in a digital environment, and the experience is very different. That you know, it's you have to learn how to be a student in that context all over again, and some of it involves uh, recognizing that some strategies that you use to engage in media don't work in this media unless they
Yeah.
build in the ability to do that with the tool. Um, yeah. So, I had a new textbook that I was using, and I couldn't get a physical copy and I hated it. I hated having to interact with the digital for a variety of reasons. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, interacting with the digital textbook is, there's something about the physicality of it and being able to get to where you need to get to,
Yes.
that I find challenging as well. But I think anyway. I hope we didn't go down a little rabbit hole on that one.
No, no,
Yeah.
because I definitely agree with everything that you were saying. I think digital, there was always going to be a discussion as to whether digital or print is actually going to affect, I mean, not just with
Mm.
academic writing, but also other different kind of books
Mm.
as well. Now that the
Yeah.
Kindle has sort of come into play with a lot of
Yep.
readers, and I think there's always going to be um, that question as to whether it's easier to read on a Kindle. I'll always say a hardcover book is the way to go for me. I can never do the whole Kindle and reading online, academic text or not. I think it's always going to be a whole other discussion, but that involves a whole other hour argument or discussion for
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
But so now we're going to go into the last section of the show, which is our open mic. Now, that gets you to talk about anything that you are passionate about, and like it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So, on the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and share what's on your mind for today's topic.
Well, I'm really passionate about visual media and cinema and comics and understanding uh, how that works cognitively, understanding how the practices of telling stories in film and or in a comic page, how those practices have evolved to um, work in a manner that we can. I mean, it's just fascinating. You watch a movie and it's easy, but it's it's as you if you I think you said you had some interest in film, or maybe I can't remember,
Yes,
but
yes, no, I did.
yeah, as you know, from the production side of things, that a film is made up of individual camera shots that are shot at very different times and places. You might have two actors who feel like it seems like they're acting together, but they're not, and but you edit the content together, and it's this easy experience. I'm really passionate about understanding how that works. It's a whole area of research, and that we didn't talk about today, but I could do an entire podcast on that. Um, so uh, uh, that's an area of research that's a near and dear to my heart. In addition to learning about how to learning what it takes to be successful in college and finding ways to help students be successful.
Mhm. No, I love media exactly for that reason, for all the behind the scenes things, all the camera work and camera angles. I think is such a great way. I also will always have print media near and dear to my heart because I I'm a huge reader. I always have at least one book everywhere I go, so I'm a huge reader no matter what. And I think print media has a whole other aspect of just sort of
Yeah.
understanding ways to go,
Mhm.
and that transition into adulthood and going into adulthood, I think it grew even further to what I used to have, and the books I used to be interested in back in high school has grown so much into what I'm interested in now. And I definitely will say that um, growing up and going into college has definitely sort of helped shape how I sort of see reading and how I sort of see what I like reading. Like I've gone from fiction almost to um, self-help books or
Yeah.
little books that sort of deal with a person's
Yeah.
experience. I got into biographies for a little bit as well, which is unlike me, but it grew so much into what I like to know about people and how I sort of see the world. And it's definitely because of college that I think has grown so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in college, you get exposed to all kinds of different, it, you know, you life in the 21st century is a multimedia experience, and we encounter a variety of different ways of engaging in information. And to me, it's just really fascinating to reflect upon how our experiences are shaped by the practices of the individuals that create media.
Yeah.
And or create different genre. I mean, you were talking about being really into biography. Well, there's a whole art form to creating biographies, and when you're exposed to a biography, it becomes a fascinating. Whatever the biographies, it's interesting, but it's also how does somebody write a really compelling biography? You know, it's really kind of a cool thing to experience when you encounter one that's awesome. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I definitely agree with that. Now, I want to thank you, Joe, for joining me on the show today. It was amazing getting to talk about this and seeing not only your professional experience, but also as an observer and sort of seeing both sides. And it was incredible to get to talk to you today. So thank you so much for joining me. If there's a way that audiences would like to see some more of your work or to see some of the things that you've written, is there a space that they are able to go into?
Um, uh, um, uh, if you uh, uh, if you Google me, Joe Magliano at uh, uh, Georgia State University, you'll find, or my department is the Department of Learning Sciences at Georgia State University. You'll find uh, my where they have me listed, and then you'll find I have a web page, but it's still under construction, and we're populating some stuff. They found me. You guys found me because I ran a blog on the Psychology Today website called The Wide Wide World of Psychology, and
Mm.
I ran it. It was part of my old department, and every week, or not every week, every month, we had a professor write about some interesting topic, and you can find some accessible, written for the general public content that I've written in the articles. One caveat is when you go on there, sometimes my face pops up and you think I wrote it. I only wrote the stuff that my name is listed, but that's another way that that folks can gain access to some of the stuff I've written that would be written for the general public.
Oh, perfect. I'll definitely have those.
Yeah.
I'll definitely have those in the description down below as well for everyone to sort of access it very easily.
Yeah, and I also, you feel free, if you Google me, it'll give you my email address. I'm a big believer in responding to. I'd love this opportunity. I mean, it's so important for scholars to talk about the research to the general public. I promise you, I will respond if you write me a question. I don't know what I'll have to say, but I promise I will respond.
Oh, well, that's perfect. That's so glad to hear. So glad to hear that that's the case. And we'll definitely put your email there as well if anyone wants to sort of send you a question over. So make it easy for everyone to do so. And yeah, thank you so much again, Joe, for joining me on the show today. It's been it's been amazing talking to you because to see your perspective and to see, I mean, it's not every day that you get to talk to a professor and sort of see their perspective and how they observe students and how they sort of understand how student functions and going into college. So yeah, thank you again for joining me.
My pleasure.
Okay, and guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the show as much as I did. Definitely go and check out some of Joe's work and send him a question. Like he says, he responds, so that's great to hear. And I'll see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at Ph.D. www.a.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.